Hi everyone. The problem now that we are going to solve involves the input table as purchase 2019. So this table has below columns purchase month, that is the month in which the item was purchased, item ID, which is the ID of the item name, which is the name of the item quantity, which is the quantity of the item that was purchased. So every entry gives the detail of purchase details of a particular item. Okay, so this is the input. As part of the output, for every item, we need to find out what is the total quantity that was purchased in particular month. Okay, so for every month, what is the total quantity that got purchased? So for easiness sake, we have ordered the input based on item ID and purchase month. So if we see here for laptop in April month, the total purchase quantity is 1100. That is 500 plus 600. So that is here for laptop in April month it is 1100. Similarly, another example if we take for laptop itself in February there is only one purchase and that is of 100 quantity. So for laptop in February it is 100. And likewise for cupboard, for example in February month, the total quantity purchased is 150. That is 50 plus 100. So that is here. So for every item, we need to find out what is the total quantity that was purchased. So this is a pivot problem, and we have already solved a similar kind of problem earlier, but using the case statement there. So a link will be provided for the same in the description. Also, you can see the link at the top for that problem. You can visit that video as well. Okay. So this problem we will solve using the pivot operator. Okay. So now having understood the input and the output, let's work on the approach how we will solve this problem. So before that, what we will do is, since we need to find the total quantity, let's see what is the total quantity for each item. And then we will form the approach the way we have to proceed ahead. So now what we will do is, from this input table purchase 2019, we will take all the columns, that is item ID, item name, and purchase month, and we will do the grouping on these columns. That is the item and the purchase month. And now we have to find out what is the total quantity. So that for that we will use the sum aggregate function. So this will give us the total quantity. Okay. And also let's order by the item ID and the month. Okay. Now let's run the query and see the output. So after running this query, now we have the information of which item is purchased, how much quantity for a particular month. So for example, laptop in April month has total quantity of 1100 that is purchased. And similarly, cupboard in February, the total quantity purchased is 150. But this is not the output that we are looking for. Like as we saw in the expected output, we want these values, the month values, in the form of columns and not in form of rows as we see here. So whenever we have such a scenario wherein we want to convert our rows into columns, so in that case we have to use the pivot operator. Okay. So now let us see how it will operate. So what pivot will do is pivot will work on this data. Okay, so let's copy this data and understand how the functionality will be. So this is the input data that we have. So in pivot, First of all, we have to specify the column on which pivot will be done, in the sense which is the column, okay, whose values will form the column names. So what we are saying is we want these values to be named as the columns. Okay, like April should be a different column, February should be a different column, January should be different column, and likewise. So in pivot, we have to specify that column which will be a pivot column. So this is one thing. Second thing is we have to specify what aggregate operation will happen. Okay. So like for example, if we have these columns in the input, so if we aggregation will happen on all the columns, okay, on all the columns, but we have to populate something under this, right? Something so for example, if we form it as a different column, what is the value that will go, what is the value that will go inside this pivot column? Okay, so for that we have to specify a aggregate function and the column on which the aggregate is to be done. Okay, so we have to specify the pivot table and we have to specify, for example, the aggregate function and the column on which it will be done. So these are the two input requirements that are to be provided whenever we are doing the pivot. So how it will operate? Basically, apart from this aggregated column that is there, for rest it will operate like a group by. So a grouping will be performed, aggregation will be performed. Okay, so that will be done, and then the aggregate function on the other column will be applied. So what will happen here on these three columns? The output will be same as what we just retrieved. Okay, so what we have done here as part of the query that we executed, we have just grouped the columns based on the item ID, item name, and purchase month. So apart from the column on which aggregation is to be done, on all the rest of the columns, a grouping is to be performed. Okay, so here we have done it explicitly, but when we will write the pivot, we will understand it further that pivot will perform this operation internally. So apart from the aggregation operation that we will specify, all the other columns which are part of the input, like in the input table we have all these four columns, so the fourth column we have specified as part of aggregation, so all the other columns will be part of group by. Okay, so if we do this operation, we will have this output. Okay, so this is the first step that pivot will perform. So let's paste this output. So what pivot has actually done, apart from the column on which the aggregation is to be performed, a group by is performed on all the other columns, and then whatever aggregation operation is specified, that is sum in this case, has been done. So this is the output that we have. Okay, so this is the output that we will have. And then what will happen is, then pivot will operate on this data because this is not the final output. Okay, so what will be the final output? We have to move the row values for this column as part of the column names. Okay, so how it will be done? So we will have these two as our columns as it is. Then we will not, now we will not be having these two columns. So we have already specified this as input. So these columns are removed. Instead, what will happen? Whatever are the values for this column, the pivot column, those will be now column names. So we will have something like this. April will be another column, February will be another column, January will be another column, and so on. Okay. And then these values, these values will now be added here. So we will have only two values because rest will go as part of the column names. Okay, rest will go as part of the column names. So now we have to check for 150 laptop, what is the total in April? It is 1100. So just add that. Then similarly, what is 150 laptop in February? It is 100. So add that. So like this, the operation will happen. So 200 cupboard in February, it is 150. So like this, the operation will happen. Okay. So how it will happen? First of all, apart from the aggregation column, group by will be performed on all the columns, and then aggregation operation will be done on the column on which aggregation is specified. So we will get this output. Post this, on the pivot table, pivot column, all the row values will be moved as part of the column names, and the respective aggregation operation, its value will be part of the column values for this pivot entries. So what we will do now is we will write the pivot function, then it will make further sense. Okay, so what we will do is we will remove this now, and straight away we will write the solution for this. So how it will operate? We have to operate on the input table, that is purchase 2019, and now we will write the pivot. So in pivot, first we will specify on which column we have to perform the aggregation. So we have to do a sum, we have to total the quantity. Okay, we have to find the sum. So now we are operating on this input table. So let's just run that. So this is the input data on which we are operating now. We will just sum the item quantity. And so this will be the aggregated operation that we are performing. And then we will specify which is the column name whose rows are to be moved as part of the column names. So that we will specify using the for clause. So for specify the column name, that is purchase month, and what are the values it holds that we want as part of the column name. So we have to specify all those columns. So like here it will be January, February, March, April, May, June, and likewise. So let's specify till June. Okay, and then we have to, since this will be a pivot table that will be created, let's give it a alias, say T1. And now we have to just select what all columns we need as part of the output. So we need item ID, we need item name, then we need all these columns. Okay. So uh, if you notice from the input, we have removed these two columns now. Okay, we are no longer getting it in the output. These two are gone. These two are being used now as part of these columns. Okay, so one column's rows are being used as the column names, and the other column values are being used as the value for these columns. Okay, so let's run this output and then we will summarize to understand further. So we have got the output that is required. Okay, so for every item, we have determined what is the total quantity that is purchased for a given month. And if there is no quantity, it is populated by null values. Okay, so how we have achieved it? We have used the pivot operator. So in pivot operator, we have to specify the aggregation function that needs to be done on a particular column, in this case item quantity, and then so this will be the value part. This will be the value part for the new columns that will be getting created. Okay, so note that this will be the value part for the new column that will get created. And what will be the new columns? New columns will be specified from a column name. So we will specify a column name from the input whose row values will become the column names. So in this case, it is purchase months. So purchase month rows entries will become the column name now. So one column has been used to specify the value using the aggregation, that is this ones, and the other column, which is purchase month, has been used to specify the column names like January, February, March, and so on. Okay, so this way we have solved the problem. So note that if we are looking for data across the other months, we simply can append the month name here. Okay, so we can add July, and then we can add August, and so on. So similarly we can have it here as well. Then we run this and see the output. So this way we can add the other entries as well. So so now it will be understood that the purpose of pivot is moving the row entries as column names, and this is the query that we have written to achieve it. Okay, so please go through it and try to understand. If you are not able to follow, please repeat the video. Pivot is a complex process, it's not understood by many, and it takes time, so please repeat this video if required. And if you found the video useful, please like it, please add your comments, and please share it with your friends. And if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe the channel. Thank you.